It's titled The War on Drugs, Addicted to Failure. One of the gentlemen involved in this project is James Gray. Joins us in our studio. He is a Superior Court judge out of Orange County, California. Good morning.
Well, good morning, Paul. It's nice to be with you.
Thank you very much for joining us. How did you get involved in this effort?
Well, I'm an old drug warrior. I was a prosecutor in Los Angeles for a number of years and held the record for the largest drug prosecution, which back in the late 70s was 75 kilos of heroin. Since then, I have seen that the record now in the Central District of California for prosecution is 19 tons of cocaine. And then as a trial judge for the last 16 years, I've just seen that this is a failure, that we are simply doing it wrong. There has to be a better way, and let's group together and find it.
And there's the title there, The War on Drugs, Addicted to Failure.
Well, we are addicted to failure, and I think the people are well ahead of the politicians, but we just need to legitimize the discussion and let people know that just because we discuss this whole issue does not mean we condone drug abuse. As soon as we get that message across, we will change our system.
Judge Gray will be with us for about 35 minutes or so as we round out this Saturday edition of the Washington Journal, and we'll get the phone numbers on the bottom of the screen. We'd like your questions and comments for the judge concerning drug policy, problems and solutions, potential solutions. Democrats can call 202-624-1111, Republicans 624-1115, and everyone else 202-737-6734. We'll get to your calls in just a couple minutes. Well, what to do? What are your ideas?
Well, again, the first thing to do is to open the discussion and have a free and honest debate about where to go. Because what we are doing now is hopeless, and we are sending money down to Colombia, which will exacerbate the problem enormously. We have lots and lots of information about this. It's everywhere if people will just look at it. The Rand Corporation back in June of 1994 stated the obvious, which is we get 7 times more value for our dollar in drug treatment here than incarceration, 11 times more value for our dollar than interdiction at the border, and 23 times more value for our dollar in drug treatment here than trying to go down to foreign countries like Colombia and eradicate it at its source. So, as a judge, I have seen that you must bring these drugs back under the law. Today we have no law whatsoever. It's all dictated by the drug dealers. Instead, regulate them, make sure that you have some quality control, and bring people closer to the medical professionals that can help them instead of doing what we do and rendering these people automatic criminals and pushing them farther away from the medical professionals. So we're harming our people, and of course we're incarcerating people much too much as far as our nonviolent drug offenders. They simply should not be in prison. They should not be.
Take some calls for Judge James Gray, Superior Court Judge, Orange County, California. Our first call, Louisville, Kentucky. Democrats line. Hello.
Yeah, how you doing, sir? I'm a Democrat, and I'm 20 years old, and I'm just getting political and volunteering for political campaigns, and I too am trying to bring this issue out, and people just shoot me down, but I'm not going to stop because I see the frivolousness of our drug war. We are funding both sides of civil wars in South America. We have people addicted to drugs paying for the rebels to fight against the government forces which we provide helicopters and guns for, and the schools of the Americas. It's amazing that we do this, and we lock our people up who are nonviolent. We have 2 million prisoners. I mean, there's just got to be a better way, and I agree with you, and I'd like to have your comments on what we can do to stabilize the world by getting a better drug policy so we can stop civil wars in South America.
Thank you. Judge Gray.
Well, we had in California a very conservative legislator. His name was Pat Nolan, and he was one of those who voted for longer and longer prison sentences. And then he was arrested and convicted for a political corruption case and served 2 years in prison. Thereafter, he came out and said, you know, based upon my new experience, I have seen there's so many people in prison that should not be there. And then in response to this call, he came out with a wonderful quote, which was, we should reserve our prison space for people we're afraid of, not people we're mad at. And I think that he's right. We must have prison, there's no question about it. Hold people accountable for their conduct, but not for what they put into their bodies. And get at those people instead, use things that work, which is education and drug treatment, but not incarceration. And I hope that your caller does get involved in politics. I hope that he supports good candidates of his choice. We need people to be involved in the political situation in our country. Right now, people are sitting back and throwing up their hands, and that's not the right way to go.
We have a call from East Palestine, Ohio, Republican line. Good morning.
Yeah, sooner or later, we're going to find out that it's the right thing to do to legalize all drugs, have them grown here in this country, regulated by the government, and distributed through the pharmacies throughout the whole country. That's the only way we're going to do it. And I just don't see how we can possibly keep throwing billions and billions and billions of dollars when we can give it to Tom DeLay so he can screw the country again.
In response to that, Judge.
Well, this is a conservative issue, this is a liberal issue, this is an everybody issue. And I agree with your caller. I would never legalize drugs as such. What you want to do, and like your caller said, is to strictly control them, regulate them for people who are over 21. And if they're going to decide to do it anyway, and some are, at least we can reduce the harm that will be caused by these drugs, because they're here to stay. We've tried to make them illegal. We've tried to keep them out of our societies. And for heaven's sake, Paul, we can't even keep them out of our prisons. How do we expect to keep them out of Ohio or Washington or where I come from in California?
About a half hour. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Well, just try to make the best of a bad situation. And you can regulate these. You can tax them. You can use that money for education, which works. Use that money for drug treatment. And we can close a lot of prisons, because we incarcerate more people in our country than anywhere in the civilized world. And we must change that. It does not make me proud to say we're number one with regard to that situation.
We have about 30 minutes left with our guest, Judge James Gray, Superior Court Judge, Orange County, California. As part of this, he's helped make up this report. It's titled The War on Drugs, Addicted to Failure, Recommendations of the Citizens Commission on U.S. Drug Policy. Tell us about this Citizens Commission. How was it formed, by who, and tell us about the kind of meetings that you had.
Certainly. We met at USC, the University of Southern California. It was sponsored by the Institute for Policy Studies. Our honorary chairperson was Harry Belafonte, who's a wonderful man. And we had numbers of judges and other people from around the country hold hearings. We took testimony from people from all walks of life, and then concluded by writing this report, which basically, and this is my word, not theirs, but says that what we're doing is hopeless. We must turn it around. We must try to bring these drugs back under the law. I ratify that and the rest. We are harming people. You name me the subject area, and I will tell you how we're doing it wrong and making things worse, no matter what you're talking about, certainly from health, from political circumstances, from incarceration, from ruining people's lives and the rest. So we need to legitimize this discussion. This was one way that we, in fact, a former Supreme Court Justice from California was on our commission, a federal magistrate was on our commission, I was as well. And this is one way of getting the word out. And we hope that this word goes and multiplies.
Get some more calls for our guest, Arlington, Virginia, Democrat line. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to thank Judge Gray for being a responsible citizen. And I just find it incredible that we have a country where we proclaim that we believe in God, and yet we have a war against God's products. Marijuana is a natural product of God. If we profess to believe in God, we have to accept that God wanted marijuana to be in the world and not to have a civil war fought over it. The other thing is we have a shortage of workers. I know people who have given up looking for work because they don't want to give up the pleasure of smoking marijuana. And they know that they can't pass a drug test, and they are no more less capable workers than somebody that smokes cigarettes or drinks alcohol. And the one thing that the newspapers could do is to publicize the tremendous, not only financial costs, but human costs of families being destroyed because the government thinks it knows better than they do about what they want to do to pursue pleasure.
All right, thanks a lot. Judge?
Well, this war on drugs, Paul, as your caller says, has become a war on our people. And I clearly think that if it were my child who had a drug problem, that I would much prefer my son, my daughter, to get drug treatment than jail. We're into this situation now, and it's not really humorous, that if you are an upper middle class or upper class white person who has used drugs in the past, the worst thing that happens to you is you have to declare that when you run for president. But if you are a lower middle class or poor person who is a minority, what happens to you is you go to jail. Now that's fundamentally wrong. Fundamentally, and I don't use this word often, fundamentally immoral. Besides, it doesn't work. Besides, it's enormously expensive from human standpoint as well as from a financial standpoint. And also then, I'm not sure that God meant us to smoke marijuana, and I don't, and just not interested. But you know, the biggest catastrophe we could inflict upon ourselves would be somehow, miraculously, to close off our borders. And that would be the worst thing that we could ever do in keeping these natural substances out. Because if that were to happen, then the demand would be met by synthetic drugs. And if anything, they're even more dangerous than the natural drugs. So as long as they're here, and mankind has always used mind-altering drugs, except the Eskimos, because they can't grow anything. But otherwise, let's recognize it. Let's allow people to do what they're going to do anyway, but reduce the harm that is caused by those very dangerous, sometimes addicting drugs. Marijuana is a dangerous drug, and I don't recommend people to use it, but it's far, far less dangerous than tobacco and far less dangerous than alcohol. And I use alcohol at least, but I use it in moderation. Most people that use drugs do not abuse drugs. And if they do abuse drugs and they commit violations of law, bring them to me as a judge, and I will hold them accountable. But otherwise, try to encourage them through education and drug treatment not to. That's working with regard to alcohol today. It's working with regard to tobacco. Education does work. It's the only thing we're doing now that is working.
Before we go back to calls, wanted to ask the judge, explain the education and treatment part of this. In your view, how would it work, and what are the costs associated with that?
The costs are not nearly as large as incarceration or anything else we're doing. You could take one prison and not build it for a tune of about $300 million, and you could get into legitimate education and treatment. What is legitimate education? You know, we have in the 90s children who have been bombarded with more drug education than any children in history, and these children are using these drugs more than any group in history. What you need in education is honesty. You need to tell our children the truth. And we are not doing that, particularly with regard to marijuana, which is a major trap. It's a pitfall, because then our children find out that we've been lying to them with regard to marijuana, and then they don't believe us when we tell them the truth about methamphetamines or cocaine or other dangerous drugs, which is simply wrong. Our children are human, and they will find out that we're not telling them the truth. What the truth is, my son, my daughter, I hope you don't use these drugs. They're harmful. They will cause all kinds of troubles for you. The body doesn't forget, and if you abuse your body, it will remember, and you'll suffer the consequences. But if you use them in moderation. I want you to use them in as healthy fashion as you can. I want you to be able to talk to me about it or other people and get honest information. So that's what goes. With regard to treatment, you can coerce people into treatment from a judicial standpoint, and I've done it with alcohol and I've done it with other drugs. But what you do is you take these problem users instead. The drugs don't have to be illegal to hold people accountable for their actions. Otherwise, then treatment covers a number of things. You help them by giving them hope in this world. You help them by giving them accurate information. You help them by helping them with some job skills and the rest. And you get them closer to the medical community. And you will be surprised with even hard addicted addicts, once they get close to the medical community, about 10% of them each year voluntarily want to get off this stuff, that people don't want to be on drugs.
Let's get back to the calls for Judge James Gray, Portage, Indiana, Republican caller. Thanks for hanging on. Indiana, are you there? Guess that caller wasn't hanging on necessarily.
I think Indiana's there, but maybe not the caller.
Move on to North Dakota. What town you calling from?
Minot.
Minot. Go ahead. You're on the independent line.
Yes, I wanted to thank you and good morning. And my question to you would be, what is your opinion on the original legislation that created the laws that outlaw marijuana, like 1937 Marijuana Tax Act? Your opinion on the current legislation going on in your home state as far as medicinal marijuana, and the legislation that perhaps in the future with the federal law against industrial hemp. Thank you.
Well, the original marijuana laws had almost nothing to do with health and had nothing to do with safety. They had everything to do with racism, unfortunately, and fear, and even building up fiefdoms with regard to the federal government. It was a tragedy that we did that. With regard to Proposition 215 in California, the medical marijuana, that has been also passed in other states. I think we're up to 8 states plus here in the District of Columbia, which would allow a medical doctor to prescribe what he or she believes to be appropriate medicine for his or her patient. And I subscribe to that enormously. It is an outrage that the federal government, the DEA, decide who or who cannot have viable medication. I can tell you a quick story that we lost my niece a while ago to a brain tumor, and if she had come to me saying for any reason that she felt marijuana would have helped her with her chemotherapy or radiation, I would have violated the law. I would have done anything for my niece to be able to give her any medication and relief that she wanted. And people around the world feel the same way. We must change, as just an immediate thing, must change marijuana from a Schedule I drug to a Schedule II drug. That could be done with a stroke of a pen, again, to allow doctors to prescribe medication instead of police officers, which is simply inappropriate. So we need to get these laws passed, and we need to allow the voters in the state of California and elsewhere to have their will brought out instead of the will of basically one person who is our drug czar, who has told me in response to a question I asked him, well, I don't personally think that marijuana is a medicine, therefore we will oppose the will of the people. That is not my country, and that's not what we're about.
James Gray has been Superior Court judge since 1989, correct?
Yes, I've been a trial judge for 16 years.
From California?
From California. Educated
at USC and UCLA. And we take a call from Overpeck, Ohio. Democrats line. Good morning.
Good morning. Judge, what can we do? The politicians these days, it's almost like the third rail of politics. If they were to say to legalize drugs or to change the laws in any way, immediately they're knocked down. What do you see as any way that we can change the opinion?
This is the epitome of a grassroots movement. We must give popular support for this issue. As soon as our quote-unquote leaders, our politicians, see that the votes are there, then they will get on board. So far, they don't have that political cover, at least they don't perceive it. But to be honest with you, I've been on numbers of talk shows like this one, and all of the people that call in are in agreement. The people are ahead of the politicians. So let's let them know, and you'd be shocked at how much effect you will have by writing a letter to your assemblyman in your legislatures, your Congress people here in Washington, your mayors, your chiefs of police, etc. It must be a grassroots movement. As soon as we legitimize this discussion, we will change our policy. I guarantee it. So let's get on with it, and you folks out there have the ability to do this. We get the government we deserve in our form of government. We're not doing a particularly good job, and whose fault is it? It's our fault. So let's get active. Let's talk to our people in Congress and elsewhere, and this will be changed.
Several callers calling about marijuana, but we also read a lot of stories in the papers about newer types of drugs. Talk to us a little bit about the most dangerous types of drugs out there now, especially some of the newer ones that you have your eyes on that concern you.
The most dangerous drug in our society today, from a standpoint of someone themselves ingesting it, is tobacco. And we subsidize tobacco, which is just another outrage. It's just downright stupid. With regard to the other drugs, the synthetic drugs, in my view, are extremely dangerous. The methamphetamines, and unfortunately a lot of pregnant women take those. It's a terrible thing. We need to give them more support and more information. Then there are these drugs that are well beyond me. They're being shown all the time. I'm here in Washington this week on a conference, and I've learned a lot about the raving ecstasy drugs or rave parties ecstasy drugs. Didn't know anything about them whatsoever. They bother me a lot. But the synthetic drugs, if anything, are more dangerous. You don't know what the quality is. You don't know what you're taking. And be real careful out there. The synthetic drugs, you see them in pill form, they could be absolutely anything. And the only way you really find out if they're any good or not, or if they're not poison or not, is to try them. And that's a terrible way to experiment. So be real careful and bring them into knowledgeable folks. There are actually, if you go to rave parties, and this is well beyond me, this is not what I do, but I understand that there are groups called Dance Save, which is, or something like that, where you can actually get your pill tested and they'll tell you what it is before you take it. Well, if that's what it comes down to, I want a medically controlled circumstance. I want our people to be safe. So find out what you're taking before you take it. But be careful. These are dangerous drugs.
As a judge, are there similarities in the stories you hear of the folks that come into your courtroom and their lawyers about their drug use? They have their own ideas on what needs to be done?
Of course. A lot of people are very concerned, as well they should be, about themselves. You'll hear President Clinton, who, when you ever ask him, and he addresses this, will talk about his brother. Oh, my brother would be dead today if it weren't for the criminal justice system. And that may be true in isolated circumstances, but there are many, many, many more people out there that are dead, that have their lives ruined by our present criminal justice system approach. The criminal justice system is great. It works, and you'd be proud of us, but it works for involvements where you have a victim, where you have people who are involved in robbery, rape, murder, and fraud, and those sorts of things. And driving under the influence, again, a crime that should be prosecuted. But for the victimless crimes, we are not set up to combat this very effectively. And in our attempts, we get these snitches, we get the drug asset forfeitures, and these various other things which have ruined our constitutional rights. We have lost more of our civil liberties because of the war on drugs than anything else in our history.
Let's go back to the phones for Judge James Gray, St. Petersburg, Florida, Republican caller. Hi.
Yes, Judge Gray. I'm sitting here smoking a cigarette, and I can't believe what you're saying. Let me real fast give you a story, personal story of mine. I was married 8 years, have 2 kids. Actually, I still am married. We lived in Detroit, Michigan. 2 years ago, my wife was working. She was a manager at a full-service restaurant at night and ran into some wrong people, 2 other ladies who did crack cocaine. Got hooked on it. Now she doesn't even spend any time with the kids. We live down here. Just everything went to hell with us. You can sit there and you can victimless. What about my 8-year-old son? What about my 5-year-old son? What about me? What about her parents? And you sit there and you say, if cigarettes are the number one, whatever. Yeah, I just completely disagree with you. I'd like your comment on it.
Thanks.
Okay, well, good for you. What I'm saying is, for you yourself, as far as your own medical history, cigarettes are very dangerous. We lose 400,000 people a year because they themselves smoke cigarettes. And by the way, it is more addictive, or at least as addictive as cocaine. That is not in any fashion to say that these other drugs are not dangerous. And crack cocaine is a seriously dangerous drug. And you can commit offenses. You get very paranoid if you're on crack cocaine or even powder cocaine. They're very dangerous drugs. But as far as doing it yourself, and my mother smoked cigarettes, and I love her dearly, and she's been fortunate that this hasn't happened. Mom, I love you. But crack cocaine is a very dangerous drug. So are methamphetamines. But they're all to be taken seriously. And cigarettes, I hope that your son, I hope that your daughter doesn't smoke cigarettes, because it's certainly leading down an unhealthy path.
Should the FDA regulate tobacco? What else should be done, if anything, in your view?
Well, you get out information. You get out accurate information. The FDA was involved with the most effective piece of legislation in our country's history. It was back in 1906, and it was the Federal Pure Food and Drug Act, which basically required truth in labeling. We had all of these snake oils out there. We had a lot of people addicted to cocaine who were agrarian middle-class housewives about in the turn of the century. As soon as we let people know that cocaine was in these snake oils, these tonics, the purchase of them dropped. People want to have accurate information. That's what the FDA should do. And then we certainly should go forward trying to help people get off them to the degree we can.
15 minutes left with Judge James Gray, Superior Court Judge from Orange County, California. We're talking about drug control policy. Call from your home state, California, San Luis Obispo, California. Good morning.
Good morning, Judge Gray. I'm a physician that has been active in these issues. I've served for 7 years on the state's Tobacco Research Advisory Committee. Certainly agree with you about the tremendous harm that tobacco does and the addictiveness of it. The one thing I have some concern about what you said was that the research shows that the number of receptor sites for marijuana in the brain is more than any other drug that's been able to be found. And please don't let anybody go away from this program thinking that marijuana isn't terribly potentially addictive, that it doesn't get stored up in fatty tissues like brain and testis and ovary, where it's a kind of a time bomb there for genetic damage and so forth. And we know that it has all the carcinogens that tobacco does. We know that it causes irritation directly to the respiratory tract, and it does constrict the blood vessels similar to tobacco. So there's great harm out there in terms of a marijuana smoking society who's also driving cars and trying to work and operate machinery and so on and so forth. And as far as medicinal marijuana goes, in our hospital we tried for many years to use the USP marijuana that's manufactured by the government as a help for our patients. God knows as physicians we want to help patients in any way we can. Marijuana is terrible medicine for almost all the people that we tried it for. Certainly the older people had dysphoric reactions. They were sick from it. Now, there are a lot of better medicines that we can help our patients with, and it's unfortunate. When I go to the rallies here for medical marijuana, the people that you talk to that are out there say, if we can just get the camel's nose under the tent here, we can go for legalization.
Caller, thanks. Comments from a doctor there.
Well, first of all, I love San Luis Obispo. It's a wonderful place, and keep that a secret. There have been no recorded deaths that I am aware of from overdosing or smoking marijuana, other than possible carcinogens, which are certainly out there. I don't use these drugs. Again, I don't mean to have anything I say imply in any fashion that these are not dangerous drugs. But in my view, and again, I'm not an expert, but from everything I have heard, marijuana is a dangerous drug, but far less dangerous than alcohol, which I do use. I use in moderation. It is a far less dangerous drug from your personal standpoint than cigarettes. But certainly, Doctor, I applaud your comment, and I certainly don't mean to imply that marijuana is not dangerous. As far as driving under the influence, I don't care if it's under the influence of alcohol or methamphetamines or marijuana. You bring them to me. That is a crime. That is a serious crime. They're putting us all in jeopardy, and hold people accountable for that offense. But otherwise, the federal government has been really hypocritical because they have simply not allowed any form in the true sense of the word, of experimentation, of regulation, and of knowledge with regard to marijuana. They say sanctimoniously that there's no medical evidence one way or the other, and they're right, but the reason that they're right is they control the marijuana studies, and they don't allow them to occur. So let's get this information out there. There are lots of people that I have spoken to. I myself, at least 100 and 150 people, who say that for them, marijuana has been a viable medication. And if they think so, and their doctor thinks so too, then maybe for some people it works, other people it does not. But the Marinol, which the federal government has said in pill form should be taken, so they have ostensibly agreed that marijuana is a good medicine, people vomit up the pill and they can't take it. They can't regulate the dosage. So I'm not a doctor, but let's get viable, accurate information out there and stop playing political games, because that's what we're doing, and we're all losing as a result of those games.
Get some more calls in. Wichita, Kansas, Republican line. You're on with Judge James Gray.
Morning.
Morning.
I will preface what I'm saying to say that I'm not a smoker or a drinker. A couple of quick questions, Judge. First of all, if we legalize marijuana, who's going to pay when the person goes to buy it? How many people have ever come before you charged with a crime of breaking and entering and stealing to support buying cigarettes? Secondly, if I'm running a factory and the workers go out on the patio to smoke a cigarette, I'm not too worried about them coming back working with machinery, since they don't have a buzz. And thirdly, as a brother of a crack addict who has gone through treatment twice, who's been incarcerated, but he still does it, how can you sit there with a straight face and say that treatment will work? Treatment won't work unless the person is willing to stop. And as a non-smoker, non-drinker, I don't want my tax dollars paying for somebody to feel good about themselves by ingesting marijuana and thinking it's the greatest thing since smoked bacon, because I personally feel that it's a precursor to other more dangerous drugs.
Thank you, Judge.
Well, that's a lot of questions, and I appreciate them being raised. With regard to cigarettes, you're right. Nobody goes out and commits a crime in order to get money to buy cigarettes, and that's my point. Let's try to run the black market out of business. They are bringing enormous harms to our country. They're making Al Capone look like Chicken Little. So we have to do better in that regard. There are ways. I wouldn't legalize any of the drugs, but if you can have a strictly controlled regulation, we would reduce the collateral harm caused by the drugs. Secondly, you're right. Also, cigarettes are a mind-altering drug to some degree, but not particularly great. So is caffeine and coffee, etc. That's a mind-altering drug, but certainly reduced from these other drugs. And I don't think that there's any particular information that drinking coffee or smoking cigarettes is going to inhibit you from driving heavy machinery. Obviously, these other drugs do, so they have harms in different levels. What we were talking about before was dying. You won't die, as I understand it, from overdosing on marijuana. You certainly will from cigarettes. And I've made that point as much as I can, and we should move forward. With regard to treatment, you're also right. People need to want to be involved in treatment. And some people can be coerced into it. I did it very successfully with regard to problem alcohol users, and 65% of those were off alcohol for 9 months, which I was very pleased with, and their lives got an awful lot better. But other people, it's a lot better to have voluntary treatment. We have at least 2 million people out there today in our country that want treatment, and we don't have the money. I have sentenced burglars who told me, Judge Gray, 3 months ago I knew I had a cocaine habit. I tried to get treatment, and they said, I know you have a habit, I know you have a problem, but come back in 6 months, we don't have the money. Then this burglar was stealing from you and me $2,000 a day in order to support his $200 a day cocaine habit. That's stupid. That is downright stupid and counterproductive from a financial standpoint, crime standpoint, and any other. So let's spend money where it works. Drug treatment does work, not for everybody, but it's certainly better than anything that we know of.
Are needle exchange programs a good idea?
Needle exchange programs are absolutely a good idea, Paul. It's crime not to have needle exchange programs.
Let's go. Go ahead. And
well,
finish.
we are inflicting AIDS and hepatitis and tuberculosis and everyone else upon our people. And I don't care what we think about people that use these injectable drugs. You can call them lazy and indolent and immoral. You certainly can call them criminals. They do not deserve to die of AIDS. And then, of course, they pass along that AIDS virus to their sexual partners, to the fetus if it's a woman, and the rest of us. We must have needle exchange programs. That's a no-brainer.
Didn't mean to cut you off. I was trying to get another call in. Townsend, Delaware. Thanks for hanging on. Independent caller. Good morning.
Hi there, Superior Court Judge James Gray. I'm Randy Powell. Let me tell you my situation. I've been busted 3 times for having marijuana. Now, I've had full-blown AIDS for 10 years. And full-blown AIDS, and I have ingested every experimental drug there has been. And it has cost me all my savings and everything just for court continuously. And the problem consists is they keep doing it, and I know the medical marijuana or the marijuana that I have ingested for 10 years has helped keep me living and keeping me strong. And the only thing the state has done is absorb what little bit of money of Social Security that I have. It just absorbed it to try to help, try to keep my fight down. And all I've done is fight, Mr. James Gray.
Well, Mr. Powell, first of all, you have a disease that is a very serious one, and I tip my hat to you and wish you well. You should not be in the criminal justice system. You and numbers of others have spoken to me about this. I don't have first-hand information. That medical doctor from San Luis Obispo seems to have other information. But I want the medical community to be able to work with you. And I do not want a police officer telling you what you should or should not take. And if you believe even that marijuana helps you in your condition, then I think you should be able to take it. I don't want you to drive under the influence of marijuana or even run a printing press. But hats off to you. You should not be in our court system. And what we are doing to you as a government is an absolute outrage. We've got to do a better job for you and our other people.
Let's go to Louisville, Kentucky. Democrats line.
Yes, I'm a member of the FAM Foundation, and I agree with you on the nonviolent offenders getting all their time for the least little stuff that they do, and I think it is wrong. And I do think we need to change the laws. They have the number of women in prison for federal drug violations increased 305% between 1987 and 1997, from 1,203 to 4,878 women. And it's just unfair the way they use the hearsay law more so than they use the weight of the drugs and everything else. It's hearsay. If a snitch come forward and say, I saw you selling something, then therefore you're going to get lifetime regardless if you're doing it or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
we do have more women in prison now than any other time in our history. It is something like 2.5 times more women than 6 years ago. What we are doing by this, regretfully, and I've had to face this numbers of times when I was in the juvenile court on the abused and neglected children calendar. We have a woman who's a single parent, has 2 children, for example, makes a big mistake, and that is she hooks up with a man who's a drug seller. And he will, to try to make this story short, he will give her, say, well, Mary, I'll give you $400 if you'll take this package across town and give it to Charlie. Well, she knows basically that it has some form of narcotics in it, and she gets caught. She goes to prison for 5 years. So what happens to her children? Well, she has legally abandoned her children, so they come to me. And I look at her, she's in a prison jumpsuit, she's wearing handcuffs, and I tell her the truth, which is, unless you're really lucky and either have a close personal friend or family member that's able to take custody of your children, they'll probably be adopted by someone else by the time you get out of prison. And she goes into hysterics. And if you are taxpayers, you should go into hysterics also, because we're going to spend about $25,000 a year to keep this mother in prison. We're going to spend about $5,000 per month per child to keep them in a group home. So you as taxpayers are spending $120,000 for the kid plus $25,000 for the mother. We're spending $145,000 of taxpayer money to separate a mother from her children. And I have had to enforce this, and it brings tears to my eyes. We're doing it wrong. We are ruining people's lives. We are incarcerating nonviolent drug offenders for no good purpose whatsoever, and let's stop it.
We're going to extend the segment just a little bit beyond 10 o'clock here in Washington while waiting for the National Rifle Association to begin its meeting in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we'll go a couple extra minutes, have time for a couple of extra calls here. Judge, as you look around the country and perhaps the world, are there any particular programs that you've had your eye on that particularly work in your view?
Paul, there are. And we should get more information about these programs. What is going on in Switzerland today is really successful. They take hardline addicted people, they bring them into treatment facilities, and if they can convince them of 3 things, they have a staff of a medical doctor, a registered nurse, and a social worker. If they can convince these folks that they are addicted to drugs, they don't want to get off at this time for whatever reason, and they will be crime-free, they will be placed on a program. And the program is that they can have their drug of choice, they can get heroin or morphine or methadone. They can inject them there in the clinical facilities under medical guidance, and they can continue to do this for only a $10 a day charge, as long as they can even afford that. They have found that these people's health has enormously improved. They have found no one has contracted AIDS like the person in Delaware. 50% more of these people are employed than were before. They're paying their taxes, they're raising their children, and crime has dropped. Well, why would crime drop? If you have people that are addicted to these drugs today in our society, the way you support your habit is to burglarize your house or commit prostitution or whatever. They don't have to do that anymore. Their health is better, crime has dropped, and all importantly, drug usage in the neighborhood surrounding these clinics also drops, because you find that using addicts have to get extra drugs to support their habit. Now, if they're arrested, they're off the program, so they don't do that anymore. You have fewer drugs in the society. You have all in all better situation. This is working in Switzerland to the degree that they had a plebiscite about 3 years ago where 70% of the people voted to keep this program going. They like it, it works, and is something that we should do too. Talk to your Congress people. There is no good reason why we can't do that.
Fishkill, New York, Republican line. You're on with Judge James Gray.
Yes, good morning. My name is Don, and I work in a drug alcohol facility. A couple of things. One is my concern about managed care, how it has almost virtually killed treatment in the sense of rehab. It has to be medical. It really gears into medical, which is detox is allowed. But they may say they have the benefit, but yet when you go to the managed care company, it's like pulling teeth trying to get a few extra days into a rehab. I think it's a real concern for people that generally want treatment, of course, and of course they're paying big dollars for insurance and they're not allowed to use it. Most of our people now, where a private facility is Medicaid, and thank God that hasn't changed, that they allowed the full sense of treatment. The other piece is the educational sense of new doctors coming in. It still isn't, I don't think, what it ought to be in relation to addiction. It's very minimal. I don't know for fact, but from hearsay from people that I know in the field, it could be a day, 2 days educational sense in relation to treatment. I did work in one program where they, as a counselor, somebody came in, for example, with something with their liver. We may go in and just discuss with them if they are drinking, what's going on, try to give them a little education on the medical end. I mean, in the sense of addiction, as they come in for being medical. So those are concerns. I think they're real concerns, and you have a wonderful show. I mean, I love what you're saying, and you're very much to the point, and the honesty is there. And some things are a little far for me, but overall, I really like what you're saying. So I'll hang up, and if you can give me an answer on that.
Thank you.
Well, sure. And Don, there is no substitute for open dialogue and honest discussion. And these are multifaceted problems. They are interconnected with virtually everything that any of us can think of. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'm interested in trying to explore them and to listen and to contemplate and to come up with something that works. With regard to money, treatment does work. It doesn't cover everything. It's no panacea. It doesn't make the world stop and these problems go away. But treatment does work, and you have seen it. We have the money in the United States of America today. We have more money in government for these issues than we need. The difficulty is we are misspending this money. It costs us something in the order of $250 to $300 million to put in one state prison or one federal prison. We don't need that. We should stop building prisons. No more. And then if we don't build one state prison, we can take that money and provide it to you as a treatment facility, and you'll have money to spare. We can return others to the taxpayers. We can keep from ruining people's lives. So all of this is important. And further, and one final point, that there were 4 of us that wrote letters to every chairman of every medical facility in the country, every medical school, stressing that they teach addiction medicine to their upcoming doctors, because we're going to need the medical community to be knowledgeable and to be able to deal with this. Policemen can't. They really don't want to either. We have to return this medical issue to medical doctors, and we need to have those doctors there when we finally realize this.
Let's go back to our Democrats line. Hamilton, Montana. You're on with Judge Gray.
Yeah, let me see. I was a good kid when I got out of high school in '66. Went in the service, and before I knew it, I was in Vietnam. Just a short time after. I never smoked pot before, but being in Saigon the first day, I was scared to death. I mean, I was scared to turn my head. I mean, I was just wanted to hide. So I started smoking there, doing it for 30 years. Seems like the judgmental people, they're in control of this whole drug deal. McCaffrey and all people support him. The punishers are in control. People like me feel like we could get busted in our cars, out in the woods, in public, in our houses, wherever, I can relate to how the Jews felt back then in the 40s, you know. This is the war on the people. I was in Mexico, and when they were trying to get recertified down there or something, I was down in Jalisco, and they shot 20 or 30 just poor Mexican people working in the fields, tending marijuana for the big drug lords down there.
All right, thanks a lot. Observations of one caller there.
Well, this man covered a lot of territory in that comment. First of all, it is the money that is perpetuating this failed system. In fact, as I said before, it's hopeless. We must change it. But every federal agency we have not only is supported by this drug money. They are addicted to the money and they don't want to stop. And it's not just the obvious ones like the Bureau of Customs and the DEA and the Department of State and certainly all of the military. It's even the little guys. It's even the Bureau of Land Management and the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Department of Agriculture. They like the money and they're addicted to it. And we must say no. With regard to our foreign policy, we are talking seriously about sending now $1 billion down to Colombia to engage in their internal civil war, into their internal strife. And if you look at it, it's amazing because that entire outlet is supported by drug money. The insurgents are using protection money from the drug sellers and the drug lords, and they are funding their entire movement by that. And we are supporting the other side. So it's the United States drug money that is involved in Colombia. We should not send any money down to them with regard to this, and instead use it here. Senator Wellstone from Minnesota, I understand, hopefully next Tuesday has an amendment to that to take at least $225 million of that $1 billion and use that for drug treatment here in our nation's prisons. Let's support that. If that's the best we can get, let's do that. But you're right. It is an insidious thing, and it's the money. It's the federal runaway freight train of money that is supporting this. We must stop it.